All right. I'm Michael Lewis, author and journalist, but I'm not the reason we're here. We're here to have a conversation with Adar Poonawalla, who is the head of the Serum Institute of India. I've been given a boilerplate to introduce him, but I'm going to ignore that because I wrote a book about the pandemic. And in writing, it was called The Premonition. And in working on The Premonition, I got to know people who are deeply involved in global vaccine manufacture, distribution, questions of fairness and equity. And I wrote one of these people just to see who you were, to make sure I wasn't getting on stage with some scoundrel, and because I have a history of doing that. And he wrote back. He said, "You're in luck." He said, "I visited the Serum Institute of India in the last year or two, and it's like going to the Emerald City. It's a mind-blowing facility in terms of its scale and state-of-the-art production facilities. It's perfected a business model of producing at scale and selling with very low margins, which allow them to be one, if not the principal provider of vaccines to low-income countries. They produced both the Novavax and the AstraZeneca COVID vaccines during the pandemic, and frankly were just as good or better at it than the companies that developed the vaccine," which is awesome, an awesome tribute. So I want to introduce you to the audience. I want to start by just talking about this strange company that you run. I mean, I think you maybe have produced more COVID vaccines than any company on the planet, and it's a family business in India. So let's start with how this business starts, and give us a little bit of the backstory.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. It's great to be here with everyone. And this business is a privately listed company that my father founded in 1966. And I've been working in this company for the last 22 years, and I took over as CEO in 2011. Our focus was always to provide low-cost vaccines for the children in the developing world countries and the lower middle-income countries where they couldn't afford to buy and get hold of these drugs and vaccines because the big pharma were very expensive. They were just too expensive to afford. And every year you'd have children dying of diseases like measles and polio, things like diseases that you don't see in the West. And so we felt that this was a huge gap that we wanted to fill. And our philosophy has always been to address that need.
Let me back you up, though. Before you start, how does your father start out as a businessman? I want to know the origins of it. You didn't start out making vaccines.
No. So the backstory was that we actually were a family of horse racing and breeding, and that was like the family business. It wasn't really profitable. It was just enough to sustain the lands that we had. This was at my grandfather's time, and back in the day, there was a shortage of anti-snake venom serum and anti-tetanus. People were getting bitten by snakes. It's a very open land and territory in India. And we were asked to send our horses to the Aspen Institute, which was this government institute, public sector institute, that would inject a tiny bit of venom every month into horses and mules, and then extract the antibodies, and then that's what you'd inject into humans if you got bitten by a snake. So my father thought...
Did this work?
Yeah, so, well, that's a longer story.
Yeah, but it's just, yeah. We have time.
Yeah. So that's how it began, and then my father decided, why don't we do this ourselves instead of just selling horses to the Institute? And that was the first product, and that's why the name of the company was Serum Institute of India.
All right.
And that's how it began.
So I'm just curious, because I'd always thought that snake anti-venom didn't work. I didn't realize you could actually, it does?
So it's these antibodies you get from, horses and animals that's, then stored in a refrigerator in a hospital. So if you get bitten, you got to go there within like an hour.
Right.
And then get injected, otherwise you're dead.
So this is the company your grandfather started.
Well, my father started the company, and the grandfather started the horse racing and breeding, which is where we had the land. And slowly we could start this with it was around $10,000 of startup capital, in the 60s that my father started with.
And how does it bounce from that to making more conventional vaccines?
Well, over the years, my father traveled all over the world to try and get technology, which was tough. In India, there was no technology. He struggled with capital because, you don't have the kind of VCs and funds that you have today.
Yeah.
It was hard to go to the banks because they'd, take all kinds of personal guarantees, and we'd mortgaged our houses and lands to do it. So it was very, very tough. The challenges he faced at that time was completely different.
Yeah.
And then slowly we went into tetanus vaccine, which was the first vaccine we made, which is something, everyone's heard about. You take it if you get into contact with like a rusted metal or have an accident. So that's how it started.
All right, so take me through your journey into the company, because it wasn't clear to you when you were a kid that you were going to come back and run this place, right?
No, I mean, I was always interested in science and how things worked, and I wanted to contribute and do something for humanity, and this was really a perfect kind of opportunity for me. So as soon as I finished my undergrad at 21, I started working in the business. And back in the day, we were only sort of taking care of the needs of India and a few other countries. But, the bureaucracy and sitting over there for permits and all that kind of stuff was very, very, it wasn't really exciting. It wasn't fun. So I decided to sort of take the company more global and start registering our company and getting it approved in terms of quality and so many other things, in terms of technology and talent, to sort of go to about 140 countries now today.
So let's move to the pandemic.
Yeah.
You by the time of by 2019, you were running the company.
Yes.
Let's walk us through your pandemic. What it looks like from through your eyes.
Well, it was a crazy time, I think, for everyone, but and a huge time of uncertainty. There were about 110 institutions all over the world that had announced that they figured out and they're working on a COVID vaccine. At the end of it, as we all witnessed, there were only 4 or 5 that finally made it into the market, and even fewer went into arms.
Which are they?
So,
why don't you name them for us?
Yeah, so I mean, you have Pfizer and Moderna, which everyone knows about in the US. I think most of the American citizens took that one. Then you had a couple of Chinese and Russian vaccines that never met the quality standards in terms of efficacy. There was a lot of controversy about it.
But they were given to people.
They were given to people, and there were a lot of desperate people who just wanted a vaccine, and they took it. Like in the Middle East, they took it. Certain other parts of Eastern Europe, and then there was the Indian vaccine. So there was an Indian manufacturer who made a vaccine, which struggled to scale up, and then eventually they got there. But what I decided to do is go with what's proven. So AstraZeneca and Oxford, great bunch of scientists and people who we partnered with, and Novavax, which is a US company. So traditionally what we've done is made vaccines developed by others. So instead of spending money and time on innovation, which is also something we're looking at, we've focused on just manufacturing. So it's a kind of lower risk kind of model,
Yeah.
but it's so much more complicated. Like 100 people could make, I think it was Elon Musk who mentioned this and said, it was probably 100 times harder to scale up production for the Tesla truck or one of his cars in high scale manufacturing compared to actually developing a product. So that's why you see so many innovators all over the world, but there's only 4 or 5 manufacturers in the world that can do what, Pfizer, Serum, and like GSK, Sanofi, these guys can do. So that's really the thing that people don't fully understand.
So why did you choose to partner up with the Oxford people as opposed to?
Well, they were ahead. So we were working with them for about 6 years, developing a malaria vaccine, which we finally launched for the African nation early this year, in fact. And that's how we knew them. So when they announced that they've got they've got a trial, a vaccine in trials, we said, look, can we just get the strain down? Let's start working on it. And this is in 2020, before anyone knew that any of the vaccines were working.
Right.
So it was very, very risky.
Right.
We borrowed a lot of money. We raised money from Bill Gates and his foundation. We took advances from other countries. So we raised like $3 billion, money we didn't have.
Right.
To build the factories, to import the equipment. It was like a no-fly zone. It was like a scene out of a movie. You couldn't even get engineers to come and fix your factories. So I think you call them C-17s here, those big,
Yep.
big, large aircraft. So we chartered a lot of those to fly and equipment and people, and like 1,000 people we had to train to build these huge factories to churn out like 100 million doses a month, of the vaccine.
Walk us through the politics of it. Like you're going to wind up making 2 billion doses of this. Who's deciding who gets them? How is that decision made?
Yeah, well,
and are you involved in it?
Yeah, when I announced and I tweeted that I'm going to decide, I think...
is that when they called you the vaccine prince?
Well, not exactly. I mean, that came later, but I was in a lot of trouble for my tweets, and like a lot of people do get into, and I stopped tweeting after that. But it was when I said that I want to give half my vaccines to the poorer countries and half to my country, everyone, sort of jumped on to said, who are you to decide?
Yeah.
And there was a time where, including my own government said, look, we're going to decide and control where the distribution goes.
Right.
But this was very troubling because we had committed to Africa and so many other countries who weren't going to get the vaccine from Pfizer, Moderna, and some of the other Western companies. So they were really stuck. Like the African continent they didn't know what to do.
Were they entirely dependent on you?
Yeah, pretty much. Because we offered the vaccine at $3, and even the Chinese, Russian vaccines were at $10, and then Pfizer, Moderna.
The vaccines that didn't work. Way. Right.
But even so, we decided to give it virtually at cost,
right.
And so it was just unaffordable for the African continent and India to be able to buy vaccines at $10, $20, $25.
But what constraints are there on your decision making when you are deciding what to do with this? Who's saying yes or you can do this or no you can't do this?
Well,
the Indian government gets involved?
It's the Indian government. It's other leaders. I spoke to most of the leaders except for the president of your country, and and I didn't really want to because I didn't know what to expect, so I just avoided that.
Did they call?
No, I mean, we were in touch. The only time I did tweet, and by then President Biden was in office, so he actually helped with this huge bottleneck of raw materials. So imagine we've promised the world that we're going to make 2 billion doses.
Yeah.
Now there's a clamoring of the raw materials, which nobody expected.
Right.
So you couldn't get raw materials, you had to pay 3 times the price.
What kind of stuff are you talking about?
And I'm talking about even plastic bags and like consumables and stuff, which you use for every batch of production.
Yeah.
And guess who makes the most of that? United States of America.
Right.
So we had to actually go to the US, and there was this sanction that the US would not ship out and allow raw materials to go out because they wanted to use it all for Pfizer and Moderna. Yeah. So I said that, if we're trying, truly to kind of unite in this world and, deal with the pandemic, right, we need your raw materials. And then finally, after a lot of back and forth and diplomacy, we got round to getting those raw materials. But these were, again, unforeseen, challenges that it was just unimaginable how to deal with it.
But you're dealing with raw national politics rather than some global health organization that is making rational decisions about where these.
That was really that's what if I look back on it, I mean, every leader of every country messed it up. They were just stupid, for lack of a better word.
Explain how. Is there a kind of typology to this?
Yeah, I mean.
Were there different kinds of stupidity, or was it all kind of?
I mean, there was a point of peak stupidity, like we heard about yesterday. But I'll give you a few examples. Like they said that here's a vaccine made, let's say, in one country, right? If you get vaccinated with that vaccine, you can't really travel to another country unless it gets approved in every individual country, even though the leaders of those countries have approved those vaccines and they're making, those vaccines with other manufacturers. So this was creating a complete chaos. Students couldn't travel, businessmen and women couldn't travel. You had a situation where supply chain costs started going up, and the inflation that we're dealing with today is partly because of that. We could have come out of the pandemic much, much faster if all the leaders, shared raw materials, vaccines, and all this kind of stuff, instead of becoming really selfish. And every political leader that's elected, they've got to take care of their own constituents. We all understand that. But they were doing it to a level that was just stupid. And, that caused a lot of damage.
Right. If I had told you before the pandemic that there's going to be a pandemic, this is the pathogen, give you the rough shape of it, and asked you to predict how it was going to play out, how did it play out differently than you imagined it would play out?
I think, firstly, it would play out exactly the way it has played out, where nobody agrees on anything, and there's total chaos. Even today, from all the lessons and lectures that we hear about, the lessons from the pandemic, what the WHO should do, what the country should do, ultimately, if leaders of two countries don't agree on even one simple thing, then you're going to have total disharmony. Yeah. Like I mentioned about the vaccine approvals, raw materials, vaccine certificates, sharing of technology, IP, for example.
Right.
You had a situation where, at a point, the big pharma refused, and this was actually quite criminal, where they could have made hundreds of millions, if not billions of doses more, if they shared their IP with so many other manufacturers in the world, but they wanted to keep it all to themselves.
Right.
They could have done it on commercial terms, give them a royalty, whatever it is, shared the revenue, but they just didn't do it. So, to answer your question, if we, God forbid, have another pandemic, we're going to be in exactly the same situation as we were, 3 years ago.
I think we're
And that's the scary part.
possibly even worse off.
I don't think worse. I think, there's a lot of know-how now. Health systems are stronger. You can detect viruses and things going around a lot faster. There have been a lot of improvements in diagnostics, in testing and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. We've built so many more hospitals and other infrastructure that could take care of, sick patients. So from that angle, I think we're better. In terms of vaccine production, not really, because no one's really invested in vaccine production after what's happened.
Explain that.
I'll tell you what I proposed to a lot of countries. I said that you spend so much on space and defense. Why don't you spend just 5% of that on vaccine production and all these other things that you were running short of during the pandemic, and nobody's listening, nobody cares. Right. Imagine for a month your country, I don't know, what was it, like 10 billion a month your country was losing in terms of economic value, jobs, so many other things. I don't know exactly, more than that. Yeah. And if you spend just $1 billion every year to build vaccine infrastructure everywhere, all across the world, and fund companies like mine and others, you could vaccinate and protect your country in a matter of a month or 2 months if you have a pandemic. Right. But nobody cares, and now, the political agendas and everything is moved to, the future. And look, you've got climate change, you've got jobs, you've got so many other things that politicians now think about, and they don't worry or think about this at all, and that's, again, quite worrying.
You said something a little earlier I want to go back to, and just the lessons that should have been learned from the pandemic. What are those?
I think, to begin with, I think it was compassion, really, wasn't it? Being selfless in, what you have and sharing that with other countries. Yeah. A lot of countries used vaccines as a soft power to kind of get things done. If they had some disagreements with certain countries, they said, look, you sign up to this and we'll give you the vaccines. Right. And I think what we learned was a lot, but if you don't follow now, from those lessons, we'll just be exactly in the same place as we were before.
What about in your company? Did you all learn anything?
Oh, lots. I mean, now we can produce 4 billion doses.
Of COVID vaccine?
Of any vaccine.
Any vaccine. Yeah.
So just to give you an example, in the US right now, there have been 3 or 4 cases of the H5N1, which is, this very scary pandemic flu strain. I think it was Michigan that reported, it moving over from animals to humans. Yep. Now, if this strain becomes contagious, it would be as bad, if not worse, than COVID.
Yep.
Again, you need funding, you need the talent and resources and infrastructure to be able to deal with this and push like a red button. I mean, we have, a red button for nuclear missiles, we have a red button for so many other things, when you're at DEFCON 5 or whatever. But this is what if a terrorist got their hands on a H5N1 and modified it using AI? You know how easy it is today to do that. And
I don't, but
I mean,
I'll take
you
your
know,
word
you
for
can
it.
you can imagine. I could in 2 days make a strain that you know could just infect, and it would be so detrimental, far worse than COVID. And AI can do that. It has the power to do that in the wrong hands. So if we don't have this infrastructure ready, funded, and ready to go, and what I propose to countries is a very simple point: take or pay. So what that means is you keep idle facilities
Yeah,
all around the world,
yeah.
ready to go. You push a button, you churn out billions of doses. 2 or 3 in the US, East, South, everywhere.
Yeah.
And it won't even cost $1 billion, $2 billion a year. But you got to burn that cash as insurance,
Yeah.
you know, and you can get that paid back 10 times, 20 times over in case there's an outbreak, there's an epidemic,
Right.
anything.
You're part of this surplus capacity, right? You built up this thing to generate.
Yeah, so now-
what are you doing with this?
Nothing. I'm preparing and
Are
just
you sitting there looking at just idle factories?
I'm sitting at looking at a 70% empty capacity right now.
Huh.
Because we scaled up so much. Now, obviously, the routine and regular vaccines, you know, we sell about 1.5 billion doses of, you know, whether it's
Right.
hepatitis, malaria, HPV, all these regular vaccines. But now the rest of the capacity is ready and available. But if now no one pays for it, which is what I've proposed to governments, you know, we'll just have to shut it down or use it for something else. And it would be a shame because a lot of other companies in my position are doing the same thing. In fact, they've already started to do
How
it.
many are there like you that have this kind of capacity?
Maybe 1 or 2 in the world.
How many others are family owned?
0.
Really, is it just you?
They're all publicly listed $100 billion companies, you know,
Right.
$200 billion companies. We're the only last privately listed vaccine company.
Why is this such a hard sell? You know, and a related question is, it doesn't surprise this kind of pandemic amnesia surprise you? How do you explain it?
It's the political will. As I said, you know, the political priorities have shifted. Nobody wants to hear and talk about the pandemic. It's, you know, something that, you know, everyone's had some trauma in, and now everyone wants either jobs, they want opportunities, climate change, issues which are very serious, like we heard Secretary Kerry talk about. So, you know, everyone wants to go to space, they want to go to other planets. So they want to look at doing things, you know, toward the future, but they don't want to focus on what needs to be fixed right now.
But it's psychologically very odd because mostly what's salient is what's just happened. That if you experience some trauma, if you get hit by a bicycle on that path and you go to the hospital, you come out of the hospital, you're looking for bicycles everywhere that might hit you. And we got hit by the bicycle, and it's as if we don't want to pretend that the bicycles don't exist. So it's a very odd psychological thing. I had before the pandemic, the October, November of 2019, I was on my way to England to promote a book, which was largely about the Trump administration and its attitude towards government. And it was sort of like, what happens if I was asked by a journalist, like, what do you think would jolt us in America out of our kind of complacency about our federal government? What would jolt us out of this kind of state we're in where we'd rather fight with each other than figure out how to solve problems? And I said, I don't know, a pandemic might do it. And I thought, but I said everybody would have to be exposed to it, rich and poor. And what I should have also said is probably have to kill children too, because it doesn't engage COVID didn't engage the American imagination sufficiently. It killed older people, and mostly. And so people were able to tell themselves stories about why we should ignore it, behave differently than we're told, so on and so forth.
But it's funny how, you know, your memory is so short. I mean, it just happened 2 or 3 years ago, but right now, no one even wants to think about it or care about it.
That's right.
So, you know, and if anyone talks about it, people feel that, oh, you're either fear-mongering or you're, you know, talking about something that really isn't going to ever happen again.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm only talking about being better prepared. That's
Yeah, but
all.
this is what government is for. I mean, people don't want to talk about it, but government should be dealing with the problem. What you're
It's
saying
their
is,
problem.
You're
It
saying
is
is
their
even governments don't want to talk about it.
No.
That's shocking. So what are you going to do with your business? If you're going to hold your breath for another stretch?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll try financially how long we can keep it going, but we've got so many other vaccines that we're working on, which we're focusing, mainly to protect children under the age of 5. So just as a rough statistic, you've got 80% of all malaria cases in the world in Africa.
Right.
And that claims more than 500,000 lives every year.
Right.
Despite mosquito nets, tablets, medications.
Right.
And now the malaria vaccine that we've launched with the University of Oxford, we're hoping to take care of that. So that's my focus this year. And then we've got, for example, HPV vaccines, which generally you take in the West, but in the developing world countries for girls, young girls and women, it's unheard of. So this is something that I want to protect, and work on for women, because it can cause all kinds of cancers and disrupt their lives, and then they can't afford to treat these kind of diseases. So vaccines, to share with everyone, has by far been the most cost-effective tool as an intervention, as a healthcare intervention. Because imagine you can prevent something from happening, so you don't go through the trauma and the hospital costs and so many other things, you burden on the national insurance and so many other things.
Right.
So that's really what I'm going to be trying to focus on.
Does India have an anti-vax movement?
Oh, yeah.
Is it as loud as the American one?
Yeah, but if the Indian government says shut up, then they shut up. So it's a little different. You've got free speech and so many other things here. We do have free speech to a certain level, but you have to be a little careful about what you say and what you do.
What could you have said that would have gotten you in trouble?
Everything I was saying was getting me into trouble.
So give me an example of some of the things that you said that got you in trouble.
I said, does the government of India ready and prepared to spend XYZ amount on vaccinating the nation? And obviously, I got a lot of blowback saying that who are you to question us that, do we have the financing and the competence and the capability to do it?
Right.
My statement was taken out of context because I was talking about planning and doing something. So many other examples, but the anti-vaxxers in the US are very different in the sense that you have a choice here to take a vaccine or not to take a vaccine. It's a personal choice. Now, what happened in the pandemic was these mandates, which really annoyed a lot of people, to say this is like an infringement on my amendments. I don't know, God knows how many amendments are being violated here. I should be free to choose and do what I want, say what I want, and which is fine in a normal situation. But in a pandemic situation, if you don't come together and trust the science, talk and listen to whether it's the CDC and your Tony Fauci kind of people, and I know he was under some controversy himself, but you really can't get over a pandemic if you don't come together in a situation like that. But anti-vaxxers, I think, are good because in the sense that they're questioning everything, and you must question everything. So ultimately, the facts and the truth comes out. Then everyone gets to know that this is safe, or this is what could happen if you took a vaccine. Should you really take one? Like I was talking to someone yesterday, someone who was around 70 years old, and he said, should I take the flu shot? Should I take the COVID shot now every year? I said, look, do you keep getting sick? How's your general health? If you're okay, don't take the vaccine. There's no need. But if you're someone who is vulnerable, if you feel, so it's always a risk reward with any medication. Why take anything, whether it's even a tablet or a painkiller, unless you absolutely have to? And that's the way I try to explain it in a very simple way.
How much attention did you pay to the U.S. pandemic response?
I mean, we were looking at it.
What did you make of it? How do you think we did compared to other countries?
I think you did okay. There were some parts where you were a bit slow in getting the vaccines into arms. We were doing something like 10 million a day, which was, significantly higher than most parts of the world. But of course, our population is much larger. I think the US managed it fairly well, but they could have done better to control the misinformation and all the other controversies that took place. Maybe next time around, God forbid, if there is ever a pandemic, that's something you could do better.
What do you think the chances are of another pandemic?
It's unlikely, and I think the next time around, I mean, look, we had exaggerated the COVID crisis so much. You know, there was so much panic. I don't think there was need for so much panic. There's always a chance of another pandemic. Like I said, a flu strain, especially these strains that you get in animals and then they cross over. Like, for example, the H5N1 is in something like 47 different animal species already. The good part is that it hasn't really found a way to go into humans. So right now there's no panic, but as I said, that can always happen. And again, don't forget, it doesn't always have to be natural. It can always be an engineered virus.
Do you think this one was?
That's tough to say. There's so many conspiracy theories and all of that. It is possible because this virus infected like none other before. So there is suggestion to that. And, you know, when you research these viruses in these labs, like it was in that Wuhan lab in China, so it definitely sort of originated from there. The Chinese didn't make it. You know, they didn't do it for this purpose because China was hurt perhaps the most out of all countries from the pandemic. So a lot of people, I think, blame China for it. But, you know, the only blame one could attribute to China was that they knew about it in 2019. The transparency aspect, where they could have shared a lot of the information of what was going on could have helped other countries better prepare. We could have shut down travel a lot sooner. You know, we could have done so many things. And that's another thing that a lot of countries need to do, is sharing information in real time with full transparency. If there's an outbreak in Africa on Ebola or whatever, we need to know what's going on, what kind of strains there are, so that, you know, people like my company and others can start working on like testing, possibly a vaccine or a cure or medication, all of that.
So in addition to maintaining idle facilities as an insurance policy, is there anything else that's not being done that you would imagine should be done or would be done?
I think building more facilities all over the world and funding them, I think that's really the key.
I was leading question because I have an answer. I'm curious that there has not been more of an effort to do for disease forecasting what we do for weather forecasting. I'd be interested in your thoughts on this.
Well, it's war games, like Bill Gates was talking about way before the pandemic. We spend so much money and time on simulating war scenarios. We need to do that with biological weapons of mass destruction and these kind of pathogens, where you simulate, you know, people living, you know, whether it's in Africa or in other countries where you're in close proximity to animals, and simulate what would happen and what would be our response to contain that. We're still not running those simulations, to answer your question. We could easily do that right now. And again, you'd be better prepared if an attack was, you know, either through whether it's a terrorist or it's a natural kind of spread.
Do you find any governments more enlightened than other governments in their attitude towards preparation? Or is everybody kind of the same right now?
I think the US has the funding and is kind of proactive. India is very, very good at that. Again, you can't use that as a general rule of thumb to all countries because they don't have the same infrastructure that these countries have. So again, China, India, US, Europe, and the UK, of course, I think these are the areas that, you know, you're seeing some work being done, but it's, again, not enough.
So a naive question, since you're supplying vaccines mostly to low-income countries, how much of the problem is supplying the vaccine and how much of the problem is actually getting it into people's arms? Is there a good mechanism for vaccinating Africa?
Yeah, so I mean, you've got UNICEF and Gavi, which is the Global Alliance of the Vaccine Initiative. Now, these are multilateral, and the WHO, multilateral organizations who have got people and infrastructure in all these countries. So the setup is there. And, you know, they just went for a raise of another $10 billion right now for the next 5 years that they need to use for this infrastructure. So you got these donor nations, United States, France, UK, Europe, who donate to Gavi and UNICEF. They use this money to build infrastructure in Africa.
What kind of infrastructure?
So you've got these clinics, training healthcare workers, buying syringes, refrigerators to store the vaccines, all this kind of stuff. And then our part is to just make the vaccine under cold storage, and we fly it out, at +2 to 8 degrees, and then deliver it to those centers.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of, it's like a done deal. It's going well, and now you've got more anti-vaxxers coming about in pockets and areas, especially after COVID, because a lot of people had some bad experiences, just generally speaking, and with the vaccines.
Right.
So, you do have that kind of anti-vaxxer kind of thinking, which you face a little bit of resistance in certain areas. But it's about explaining to them and giving them the right guidance. And again, not everyone should take the vaccine if you don't need to or you're not at risk.
Right.
Like, for example, I'm going to go to Kenya in July, and I've got to take the yellow fever vaccine. Now, I'm thinking to myself, do I take it or I don't take it?
Do you make it for yourself?
No, I don't make one yet, but I'm going to in 2 or 3 years. But there's a great company called Sanofi. It's a very big company that makes it. And if I were to take it, it would be that one. But again, I've got to think about how much exposure am I going to have to mosquitoes and what I'm going to be doing there before I go ahead and take it, because why should I unnecessarily put something into my body, right? And I'm saying this as a vaccine.
Yeah, no, it's a little surprising to hear it from you.
Yeah, so I'm very transparent about that. And so if I feel I'm going to be with animals and a lot of mosquitoes because I'm going on safari as part of my thing, then I'm probably going to take it.
Yeah. Were you surprised by the speed and efficacy of the mRNA vaccines?
Well, they didn't do very well because in the sense that they didn't protect you for more than 4 or 5 months.
Right.
And
But that the technology worked.
I don't know. I think the jury is still out on that.
Really?
Yeah, because never, ever in the past has the messenger RNA technology been used to make vaccines.
Right.
Now people are trying to do that for future vaccines, but again, it's a very new technology.
Right.
And nobody knows what it does going deep into
actually,
your...
briefly, because we only have a few minutes left before briefly explain the difference between that vaccine and the vaccines you made.
Right. So we make the traditional vaccine. So you've got, let's say, a virus which is attenuated. So basically you make it weaker. It can't harm you, but it's enough to teach your immune system
Which you did with horses and snake venom.
Right. Well, kind of, yes. And then you've got other vaccines where you have a protein or a cold virus, like the AstraZeneca one. Right. You know what that was? That was basically a chimpanzee cold that we injected into people. It was just a cold. So the only reaction you could get is like flu-like symptoms. And why? Because you need to have the antigen being carried onto something to put into your body. Now, messenger RNA is something where it goes into your cells and tells your cells to make and produce the antigen. Now, in theory, that sounds good, and it's great if it works. We're also working on some messenger RNA technologies. But, all these vaccines have been tried and tested for decades. The safety profile has been established for decades. That's why I went with a proven, established technology platform, both in terms of safety, efficacy, all of that. Messenger RNA, the advantage is you can make a lot very quickly, so they went for that.
Yep.
But we don't know the long-term effects of whether it's, whether messenger RNA vaccines, even the viral vector vaccines, can have long-term side effects. We don't know that. But at the time of the pandemic, there was enough safety data to prove that it's not giving you the kind of reactions and, less than 0.001% of people would get a severe reaction to the vaccines. And that's where the regulators said, okay, this is the risk reward that we're happy with, that if you get COVID, it's much worse. I mean, there were higher chances of you dying of a car accident, statistically speaking, than getting a reaction to the vaccine. Right. So there were many examples that the regulators had to weigh up statistically to say that, are we licensing something quickly which could have safety issues? Right. I myself wouldn't have made something where I know that if it's unsafe, I'm risking my company also. Forget the ethical issue for a moment, which is very important to us. But why would I risk my company and expose it doing something that's not been tested or proven. So it's only after the safety was proven, beyond reasonable doubt, that we said, okay, we'll scale up and make the vaccine.
But to this day, you're not convinced that the vaccines we're taking are as good as the vaccines you're making.
No, I think time will tell. Yeah, I mean, for COVID, it's a mixed bag. It's debatable. I could sit here and say what I made was better or not. I'm not really, to be honest, biased on any of the vaccines because I make it for a lot of the different innovators and companies. Right. So it's not my place really, but in my opinion, from what I saw, the messenger RNA vaccines, you needed to take 4 or 5 shots. And then you heard about all the the cardiac issues and so many other issues. So, I would say the jury is still out.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to the audience for questions.
Sure.
Thank you. I've got a question about Michael Lewis characters. And what I mean by that, basically, is are we going to the desert looking for water, counting on government to constantly get it right? Or are we better to rely on heroes at the time emerging as they seem to, whose names we've never heard, but somehow solve our problems for us?
That's a question for you.
That's a good question. I know we like to rely on the government, a lot for everything because we pay taxes and, it's their job. That's what we elect them for. But most of the solutions, I think, have come from the private sector, whether it's innovation, whether it's risk-taking. A government can't take the kind of risks and decisions that a private sector company or organization or an entrepreneur can do.
I would say almost the opposite.
Yeah.
The government can take risks that a private sector never would.
Well, different kinds of risks. Yeah. So, where the government can come in is, let's say, on funding or building infrastructure, which is their job. That's what they should be doing. Again, explaining to the public, helping the public with, whatever issues they have. But the innovation and scaling up of anything would generally come from the private sector. So I would say a bit of both. So we need to rely on both. You wouldn't have an Elon Musk without NASA and vice versa and all the things that we heard about the other day. So I think it goes hand in hand.
This is going to be hard. Why don't we go here? Because she was fast.
This is just about the business of how do you keep a factory idle and then ramp it up fast when you have, I'm assuming, employees that maybe you aren't paying, or are you paying while they're idle? Because I think workforce issues can be a big issue. I know that was an issue when things shut down and then they couldn't find people to come back to different industries.
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate to be able to rejig these empty factories to make all these other vaccines. Now, there's always going to be a period of time lag where we will suffer for the next 3 to 4 years till we fill up those factories in terms of full capacity. But the advantage we have in India also is that the labor cost is pretty low. So we can kind of afford to tide over, the bad times where you'd make no profit, but at least you pay your employees and keep them going because it's not nice to let people go, and at the same time, you don't want to be in a situation in 2 or 3 years' time where you need to retrain all the staff, which it takes a lot of time for them to handle all these technical processes in a kind of science or engineering setting. So we've chosen to keep everyone going, and hopefully, some of these other vaccines I talked about can fill up some of the capacity and keep us going. So.
Let's go here.
I thought it was interesting that you're a manufacturer of a vaccine, and the one thing you said is, don't take anything if you don't need it.
Right.
Now, you go to a doctor or a pharmacist, they're all overprotective, so they give you, okay, take this flu thing, take this. So what's... How do you deal
You're
with
absolutely right. You've hit the nail on the head. Your choice somewhat is taken away from the reliance and trust you have in your doctor. So you might think about something, but you'd always go by ultimately what your doctor recommends, which is the right thing to do. It's sad, in some cases, some of the medical associations and doctors do push, whether it's vaccines, drugs, or whatever. But I think the more you can, my only advice here is that the more you can read up and sort of be informed from the right sources, you could perhaps make your own decisions and question your doctor. Now, for example, when you meet your doctor next, why don't you ask him, why should I take the flu shot this year? I mean, do I need to? I mean, am I weak in some way? Is my immunity not good? Why should I take it? Or the same for, let's say, a COVID shot, which is probably going to be something that's coming up as a combined COVID and flu vaccine that everyone's going to take now every year.
Do you get vaccinated?
Yeah,
Do you get a flu shot?
sometimes, some seasons. So I don't take it every year.
Yeah.
Now in India, let me tell you, there's far worse things than flu. So going to countries like India and Africa, you got to be careful of so many other things, diseases and all that. So we're kind of, and look, our immunity is somewhat different. If you come to India and you eat food from the street, you're going to get a bad stomach. I might do also because I'm not spending as much time in India as I used to, but there are many examples where it's apples and oranges, so you can't directly compare with what I might do. But
Did you get a COVID shot?
oh yeah.
All right.
I took it from the first batch. So I took 2 of the AstraZeneca ones, and then I took 2 of the Novavax ones. Because I had to make sure I took enough vaccines from both the guys who I've partnered with. Otherwise, one would say, "Hey, but you're promoting that one on your Twitter account. You better take a video of you taking this one as well." So I had to take both.
Let's do a question from the back. Is there someone in the back there we go.
Don't your answers fail to take into account the potential for mutations, both in the flu and in SARS-CoV-2?
Yes.
So, and are you continuing to make vaccine, assuming that there will be mutations and that the population will continue to need the COVID?
Correct. So every year, I don't know if everyone's aware, but the flu shot you take is always different to the one you took the year before. So the WHO identifies the strains, right, that the
You hope they
vaccine
get it right.
manufacturers,
Yeah.
no, they get that part right. That's pretty standard now. So, and it's the same with COVID. The only thing with COVID is that it's been changing so often right now. I forget the names now. There's the JN1, now the KP1 and all that. I don't know who names these strains, but what we're working on right now is trying to get a universal kind of COVID vaccine. That's where everyone's trying to work on. So you don't have to keep vaccinating every year. You don't have to keep investing to make up a new cell line and all of that, which is expensive. I think we're making one with Novavax right now, which is up to the most current mutated variant. In fact, we're selling some of that in the US, very small quantities. So to answer your question, yes, every year we have to work, and we do get new strains that are given by the WHO, and we're trying to get a universal one done so we don't have to keep doing it every year.
We have time for one more, so how about right back here?
Hi, thank you so much. I had a question about costs, particularly in developing countries. How do you get the vaccines to be affordable? Because that's always the first question that comes up.
That was a very good question. So we produce at least 100 or 200 million doses of each vaccine that we get into. If we can't scale up and if we don't have enough demand for it, we just don't do it. The idea is if you make so much of it from a fixed cost of just 1 or 2 buildings, that's how you bring the cost down from economies of scale. It's, yes, better technology and processes, we're efficient, we've got lower manpower costs, but the main overriding factor in keeping our costs down, just to give you an example, a company like a GSK or Sanofi may make 20, 30, 40 million doses of a particular vaccine without naming a vaccine. We would make 250 million doses of the same vaccine. So imagine in 1 building or 2 buildings, you churn out 200 million doses, but your costs are the same because it's the same energy costs from the power, the manpower required, the salaries, and the 2 shifts that you operate in.
Yeah.
So imagine that cost is pretty much the same. And with that cost being constant, you produce so much more, the per unit price of what you put out comes down. And that's how we're able to keep that cost down. And, we could easily charge higher prices, but then, as I mentioned, a lot of the countries wouldn't get vaccinated that we supply to.
Right.
Outside of the US and Europe and all of that.
Adar Poonawalla. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.